Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War news update, third part thereof for the 16th of October 2024. I actually recorded this as part of my military aid video, but it got too long, so I've cut it in two. And actually, in the subsequent time, I've just heard this. South Korea has announced it will send direct military aid to Ukraine if North Korean troops are seen on the front line. That's an interesting little nugget there. We'll have to find out more details about that. I'll go and look into that. But in the meantime, here's what I recorded earlier. Anyway, we talked about the victory plan. I gave you more details on that in my first video today. Now, talking about North Korea, significant strengthening of ties is what the US is, quote, concerned about. So the US is concerned by reports of North Korean soldiers fighting for Russia, says State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller. Now, old Nosferatu might have come out and said this, and actually he's getting a lot of pushback for really downplaying this. Some people saying, well, that's exactly the sort of language that they used in 2014 with the Little Green Men. If true, it signals a significant strengthening of ties between the two countries. But actually, if it's not true, then you're probably better off being a little bit cautious here with your language. So I think concerned by the reports and then if true just means that there are reports ain't necessarily true. Now, this is still the rhetoric if we do have bona fide evidence of North Korean soldiers in Russia, then that's wholly unacceptable. It's just about acceptable now, given that the reports are not necessarily 100%. Talking about North Korea, it's worth noting that they are, well, things are rather heating up on the border between North Korea and South Korea. So in the demilitarized zone, there's a road there that the North Koreans have just blown up. Then the South Koreans were shooting across the border into the demilitarized zone, and it's all gone a bit crazy. North Korean state media has claimed that 1.4 million young people have applied to join or return to the army this week, blaming Seoul for a recent drone incursion that escalated tensions. This follows accusations of South Korean drones dropping anti-North leaflets and North Korea's retaliation by destroying inter-Korean infrastructure. That's the road I was just talking about. So things are hotting up there, and I guess from a North Korean point of view, like the silver lining from this, again, another terrible conflict possibly, the silver lining for Ukraine would be if North Korea gets slightly worried that South Korea are going to start getting involved, and if these guys are worried about some kind of military interaction, then North Korea are going to want to hold on to their ammunition and all of the kit that they are sending to Russia. So you might start seeing a drying up of that, and that will be good news for Ukraine. I mean, what you'd really want is tensions to rise here, but nothing happen, and then that force North Korea to stop helping Russia so much. Biden is to meet what they call the Quad, German, French, and British leaders in Berlin this week. So I think a couple of days' time. I think it's touted for the 18th of October. So that's going to be Friday. Spain has seized 13 tons of chemicals, including possible chemical weapon precursors bound for Russia. Spanish police seized a total of 13 tons of prohibited chemicals, including those precursors. On the 15th, yesterday, 4 suspects were arrested in relation to the seizure and were charged with smuggling banned goods as they allegedly attempted to circumvent EU sanctions which prohibit the shipping of dual-use chemicals to Russia. Good on you, the Spanish Guardia Civil there, I would have thought. Right, India has sharply reduced purchases of Russian coal, slashed its imports of Russian coal by 26% in the first 9 months of 2024, signalling a major shift in the global coal trade. Now, I don't know if this is economic or sanction-based behaviour from India, but that's good news. We want Russia not to be furnished with a huge amount of spondoolies to bankroll their invasion. Now, there have been issues with Finland. There's been further attacks So this happened. So according to Foreign Policy, this summer mysterious intruders have been breaking into Finnish water towers and treatment plants. I think other Scandinavian countries as well, by the way. They've stolen nothing, but there are other reasons for breaking into water treatment plants: to scout them for future attacks, or to cause public to worry about the safety of their water in their taps. By disabling water treatment or adding a contaminant, an intruder could turn the life-giving liquid into a source of disease. There's suspicion that Russia might be behind these attacks. The water attacks in Finland started in Porvoo, a town on the southern coast. Finland's, I know I've got a bunch of Finnish watchers, viewers. Let me know what you think about this. Finland's southern coast is ordinarily rather quiet, but its immediate neighbour is the Gulf of Finland, the passageway for ships going to and from St. Petersburg. By mid-July, there have been 11 break-in attempts into Finnish water towers and treatment plants, but the intruders didn't reach any sensitive parts in the water plants and towers. Authorities are asking who would have the interest in breaking into Finnish water plants. The water treatment companies have said that the break-ins are not a normal situation, and that's making people worried, said retired Major General Pekka Toveri, a former chief of Finnish military intelligence. And one goal of Russia's grey zone aggression is to create fear, a retired Lieutenant General Arto Ratti said. We have no evidence showing who is behind these actions, but naturally in speculations the finger is pointing to the east. Is this where I do my Finnish accent? Finland? No, that's more Swedish. No, I'm not even going to try. I once dated a Finnish girl in New Zealand. Good times. Finland is not the first country to see its water supply targeted. For example, this May, Janet McCabe, the Deputy Administrator of the US Environmental Protection Agency, warned that China, Russia and Iran were actively seeking the capability to disable US critical infrastructure, including water and wastewater. Friends from Finland, what is the situation now and what do the authorities think? Okay. We have had, was it Pennsylvania, there was a water treatment plant attacked a year or two ago by the Russians. The Russians are involved in this activity. You know, what are we doing about it? Just in the past 6 months, says G in Kyiv, Russians have poisoned European water supplies, tried to crash civilian airliner. Obviously, they haven't actually poisoned it. Burned European shopping malls, sabotaged French and German train networks, and still Western countries refuse to give Ukraine what they ask for. It's incredible. And yeah, he's got a point. And actually, we're going to come back to this. Well, we probably should do that now. Okay, let's go, because it makes sense. Russia is flooding Germany with more disinformation than ever. Officials warn. Analysts say that this tactic is helping pro-Kremlin narratives increasingly seep into the country's politics. And Moscow's willingness, as a quote, to use hybrid and covert measures has reached a level previously unseen, said Bruno Karl, the head of the BND, while also warning that, I think that's the German intelligence services, while also warning that, quote, direct military confrontation with NATO has become an option for Moscow. So remember, I think Germany have a report saying that the conflict with NATO could be on the cards within 6 years. Poland had it within 3, 4, 5 years, something like that. So different countries, I think Baltic nations have also got their own reports on this, are worried about Russia and their, not only their present interference in said nations, but you know where this is all leading. It's really, really worrying. And Olaf Scholz has actually called Russian soldiers in Ukraine victims of imperialist madness. Quote, this is a time when, along with unequivocal support for Ukraine, we have to do everything we can to figure out how to make sure that this war does not continue, so that it doesn't happen when an incredible number of women and men die as victims of Russian bombs and missiles, when soldiers die in this war. And let's not forget, untold numbers of Russian soldiers every day are also victims of the imperialist madness of the Russian president. They are also victims of its policy, which aims to increase the size of their country, which should not be the case in Europe, Olaf Scholz said in the Bundestag today. So that's good, and actually I agree with that. I see, when I'm feeling a little bit more philosophical and less reactive, I see Russian soldiers as victims themselves, victims of brainwashing, of cultural manipulation. Right, I've promised this for a long time, and it fits in with what we were just talking about. How long have I been banging on for? Quite a long time, but we'll do this. So great thread here from Pekka Kallioniemi. On this cesspit of a website, that's Twitter, pro-Western and pro-Ukrainian accounts are suppressed and significantly outnumbered, and essentially have to work on their own initiative, unable to scale up operations due to the lack of practically any support of their work that is not coming from any kind, often anonymous volunteers. So this is a Pekka Kallioniemi Vatnik soup here, where he's looking at the fight back against Russian disinformation. I've talked long about how we don't take the fight to Russia. There are some things like, indeed, the news source there, Radio Liberty, was it Voice of America, the Radio Free Europe, that's it. That's paid for by the Americans. That is the American propaganda arm, but not in a kind of disinformation way. So the Russian propaganda efforts are to disinform and manipulate people in Europe and America into having the incorrect appreciation of reality, and therefore make decisions on the back of that. So, for example, they want people to vote for Trump, so they're going to either amplify stuff that is real into unrealistic amplification, if you like, or make up stuff out of whole cloth and disinform. That manipulates them. So the counter, I would argue, is that we need to manipulate Russian audiences, but manipulate them with truth and positive narratives of what the West is. Not what you're told what the West is, but what in reality it is, what life is like. We're going back to like Cold War era kind of stuff. Is that enough? Like, how should we be tackling the Russian voluminous disinformation content? So Pekka here says, in today's Vatnik Soup, I'm going to outline the current situation in the West's information war against Russia and its allies. Currently, the West's counter-disinformation measures are severely underfunded, making it difficult to combat Russian influence operations effectively, he says. And this news piece from Radio Liberty, leaked records detail vast Russian influence campaign targeting Ukraine and the EU. Europe today is repeating the same mistake in information warfare that it made in conventional warfare. We are not dedicating enough resources to counter it. Just as Europe was unprepared to fully support Ukraine and prepare for kinetic warfare against Russia, we have been neglecting information warfare. Next year, Russia is reportedly set to spend around $3 billion on its information operations domestically and abroad, while allies like the CCP, so China, Iran and North Korea, likely following suit. So we've got Western ammo stocks at the bottom of the barrel as Ukraine war drags on, NATO officials warn. So that's the kind of, we're not prepared for kinetic war. And then, Russia's to spend $118 million per month on state propaganda in 2025, says the Euromaidan Press. Brookings Institute says China and Russia are joining forces to spread disinformation. And BBC here says North Korea hackers trying to steal nuclear secrets, US and UK warn. So what are we doing about this? Although I'd say that's cyber warfare, less epistemic warfare, sort of information warfare. In the EU, although they are stealing information, of course. In the EU, each country has its own funding for countering disinformation and foreign influence operations, but these budgets are minuscule compared to what our adversaries spend. The further a country is from Russia, the more valuable it becomes to these operations. And the less it tends to spend, a very troubling trend. For example, Russia continues to carry out large-scale propaganda and soft power operations in Italy, and Spain's Vox party was funded in part by a bank owned by Viktor Orban. I reported that a few weeks ago, a close Russian ally. And here we have 500 Italian companies were permanently in Russia, says this news source. So talking about the connections. Last year, 100 Italian companies employed 34,000 people in Russia and generated $7.3 billion in revenue. After the war broke, only 2 companies completely exited Russia by selling their shares. And there you go. So, Italy is very much intrinsically linked to Russia. Vox admits to having received 9.2 million from a Hungarian bank close to Orban. It says El País, and I reported that too. I recently attended, says Kallioniemi, the Disinformation 2024 conference, where much of the discussion centered on the West's successes in detecting Russian disinformation operations such as Doppelganger. Since then, many more campaigns and operations have been uncovered by authorities, investigative journalist groups, and researchers. Some examples include the money laundering operation involving the US-based media company Tenet Media, the Russian troll farm social design agency SDA, and a large-scale automation automated fake news blog network. So this OSW, Center for Eastern Studies, report Doppelganger, the pattern of Russia's anti-Western influence operations. So doppelgangers are these news websites that are made to look like, so you have something that looks like CNN but isn't CNN, and that produces a fake, they then produce a fake news article, and that gets shared, and actually it's not CNN. That's different to, or similar to, ones that are made up but kind of sound like official. Was it the Voice of Europe was the one that the Russians set up, which is not supposed to mirror completely. It's not a mimic, but it is supposed to sound official. Here we've got another article. Media startup from Benny Johnson, Tim Pool and Dave Rubin was secret Russian influence campaign indictment alleges, and I went through that at the time, if you remember. Leaked files from Putin's troll factory. This is an excellent article. That's a V-Square article which I shared with you. Leaked files from Putin's troll factory, how Russia manipulated the European elections, and that's the SDA. That's Social Design Organization. I forget what it was called, but yeah, anyway. SDA, Social Design Agency. Anyway, to continue, so you've got these large-scale automated fake news blog networks organized from Moscow by the American vatnik John Mark Dugan. What the EU lacks is cooperation between countries and organizations, as well as a strong enough response to the nations orchestrating these operations. So he's this Florida deputy, this fugitive one who went to Russia and is now spreading disinformation. It's horrendous. As is tradition, the EU regulates, but regulation is always too slow to respond to the rapid pace of online operations to effectively counter them. The West must develop a rapid response strategy. One such strategy is utilizing social media movements such as NAFO. And NAFO, honestly, brilliant. Digital Services Act package there. So you got the Digital Services Act. So there is regulation. Opinion, Kyiv Independent says NAFO is waging Ukraine's meme war. And this is really important. The alarming conclusion is that the EU is consistently one step behind. To recognize the information war against Russia and its allies is an ongoing conflict, and at the moment we are losing it badly. And the European Interest article here says, as a new scandal with Russian spies emerges, the far right rises in Austria. And another, a DW piece, says Russian propaganda celebrates German far right. So of course the interference in European elections is leading to a surge in the far right that undermines the unity of the European Union, which is exactly what Russia wants. And with that will become a lack of unified support for Ukraine. Here we have the Office of Public Affairs, the US Department of Justice, saying Justice Department disrupts covert Russian government-sponsored foreign malign influence operation targeting audiences in the US and elsewhere. So the situation, says Pekka, in the US is even worse. Aside from the recent Department of Justice indictments against Tenet Media and the Doppelganger project, the US is quickly heading toward a reality where disinformation becomes a core political strategy and foreign influence operations are largely ignored. I think this is absolutely true. So I think Twitter is essentially 50% of it is just manipulated content by people disinforming the other side. Like I'd love to know the percentage of people that are bots and trolls that aren't actually people for a start, or they're certainly not the people they purport to be. Strong signals of this shift are coming from the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, which is said to be, quote, the blueprint for a Trump presidency should he win in the 2024 election. The project proposes defunding. This is why Project 2025 is so scary and why Trump should not be elected in. It's stuff like this. So it proposes defunding the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, one of the key organizations combating foreign influence and disinformation. Why would you want to do that? Why the hell would you want to do that? So the Brennan Center for Justice piece here, Project 2025's plan for Cybersecurity Agency threatens election security. That's why. Because it's your way of getting who you want in continually in elections. Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter has worsened the problem, and one large Russian operation even concluded that X is currently the only social media platform where you can conduct large-scale disinformation operations effectively. And the Guardian piece here saying Elon Musk does not grasp the EU fears about disinformation on Twitter, official says. She's working really hard, by the way. The EU Commissioner Vera Jourova, she's in charge of like disinformation and whatnot. Elon himself has spread propaganda memes produced by these troll farms. The Centre for Countering Digital Hate has stated that Musk's fake posts on US elections have been seen over 1.2 billion times. So the future is looking pretty grim right now. Elon Musk mocks Zelenskyy over calls for aid, and then he spreads that Russian meme on Zelenskyy, which takes the Mickey out of Zelenskyy, and all this sort of stuff, all the stuff that we know is done over the course of this war. However, there have been some positive signs and interesting developments. Through transparency, Western intelligence agencies and think tanks have, like the Institute for the Study of War, have exposed several kinetic operations planned against Ukraine and the West. BBC article here, Russia-Ukraine. US warns of false flag operation. Russia's plotting to stage acts of provocation to create a pretext to invade Ukraine, a US official has said. So that was going back into January 2022. So, there are elements of success and finding out what's going on, but it's just very minimal. Now we need to apply the same level of transparency to Russia's propagandists and their online operations. Doing so would greatly reduce their effectiveness against Western democracies. Instead of always reacting and debunking, we need to start pre-bunking. Brilliant. And NPR here, false information is everywhere. Pre-bunking tries to head it off early. That's exactly right. This is what is going to happen in this election. Watch out if people say this. This is why I say there should be news pieces on public service broadcasters on television news that say, by the way, when you go on places like Twitter, if you see something that looks like this, that is probably a troll, and it's probably employed by Russia. Or this is what a bot looks like. We need to educate everyone in our electorate, because actually they are getting sucked in all too easily. I look on Twitter all the time, every day. I'm trying to gather sources and information, and I look on the US election, and I go from outright manic depression to huge happiness, because it depends who I'm reading. It's just so much disinformation all over the place, and things interpreted through different lenses, which are ostensibly often massively incorrect, that I can get, and I know what I'm doing, right? But I can get swept along massively and end up in quite a dark place, and then think, actually, is that reality though? As I read all these people, how many of these are actually people? So it makes me so depressed that all of these people could believe these horrible things. Actually, are 50% of them Russian? Are 50% of them not even human? Anyway, that's that. Final couple of bits. Like, Nicaraguan dictator Daniel Ortega has called Zelenskyy a son of a Hitler. He is another Nazi, another son of Hitler who wants to involve NATO in a war with Russia, said the pro-Russian authoritarian ruler Daniel Ortega. Yeah, you can jog on, mate. Now, this is interesting. So I did my US election video yesterday, and it could have gone on for like 6 hours. There's so much content, and there's so much content of Trump doing really bizarre things, like that whole music swaying for 39 minutes instead of answering questions. Some people have fainted, but then he said, who wants to answer questions? Let's just listen to music instead. Yeah, we want questions. We want music, not questions. And then he's just going mad, right? And just having these weird rambling sessions where he's just not answering the question, going off on one and falling apart. Now, it's really interesting. So he was interviewed by Bloomberg at the Chicago Economic Forum, and it was an absolutely unmitigated disaster, right? In my humble opinion, his answers were insane, very bad, and showed that he doesn't have the first clue about economics. And yet JD Vance, Donald Trump Jr., Stephen Miller said it was the best political interview, best economic interview that he'd ever seen in any politician give, period. It's like, are you watching the same thing? So it's really weird how I'm like, this is objectively terrible. Like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, as far as I'm concerned, that's not my subjective opinion. He objectively doesn't understand how tariffs work. He objectively is not answering the question. He's objectively going off on and talking about something completely different, right? And I see this as very bad, but it's been sold as being amazing by the other side. Why am I talking about this in the Ukraine video? Because Russian television, who are ostensibly pro-Trump, are actually giving quite an honest opinion of what Trump is actually like. So they are starting to say, he's a little bit nuts, or his mental acuity isn't quite what the Republicans are claiming it is. As Aaron Rupar says, Russian state TV is doing more accurate coverage of Trump than Fox News. Julia Davis from Russian Media Monitor says, meanwhile in Russia, state TV weighed in on Dancing Donald and reluctantly acknowledged that there are legitimate reasons to question his mental acuity. It's just interesting that, like, well, you can listen to Fox News and think he was amazing, or you go to Russia and they actually loved themselves a bit of Trump. He's what they call him, our man, right? Literally, that's the term. And they're saying, yeah, a little bit nuts. Now, we've breaking NATO's diplomatic protocol. Hungary's senior army chief has engaged in a conversation with Russia's military attaché. Surprising Western allies, the number of Russian diplomats in Hungary is nearly equal to the total of the other Visegrad countries combined. In other words, of all those countries in that neck of the woods, the number of Russian diplomats in Hungary is equal to Russian diplomats in all the other countries combined. Hungary is massively in the sphere of influence of Russia, and they are acting more and more as a Russian proxy. What are we doing about it? And I think finally, the UK has decided to, not finally the UK's done this, but the final thing from my video, the UK has decided to suspend the war drop dialogue with Georgia at the ministerial level. So this is very similar to the EU pulling back from accession talks for Georgia into the EU. British ambassador has expressed hope that after the elections, the Georgian government will return to a pro-Western course and trust would be restored. In other words, the UK has gone, you guys are moving in the wrong direction. We're just going to stop being pally with you for the moment. Hope you make, what this is intended to do is scare the electorate into voting for a pro-Western political party rather than the Georgian dream. It's carrot and stick. It's difficult to know what to do. They need free and fair elections, and they're unlikely to get that. But it's on a knife edge, Georgia at the moment, as to which direction that country is going to be travelling in. Anyway, that's enough from me. It was a bumper one today. Thanks so much. Take care and speak to you soon. In fact, probably have split this video down into two for so this is probably only the geopolitics video by now. I'd probably split that as a decision. In fact, I've just made that decision now. Take care, guys. Speak soon.